A Murder at Christmas. The murder of Joanna Yeates, and how the British media managed to completely vilify and point everyone towards an innocent man. So this one is mad, you guys, and also quite sad, and not just because of the tragic and disturbing murder of a vulnerable woman, but also because of how the British media jumped to conclusions, all wanting to be the first to report on the story, of course. They managed to entirely vilify and pin the slaying on a completely innocent man. Warning: this episode and story may be upsetting and disturbing for some viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. It's December 2010, and Joanna is completely in the Christmas spirit, as she always was every year, and that since Christmas was Joanna's absolute favourite time to celebrate. But unfortunately, due to one person and their sick desires, it would turn out that she would never even get to see, never mind celebrate Christmas that year. Now this story is actually quite long, but I'm really going to try this time to shorten it. Yet include as many details as I can for you. Sorry, I laugh because I actually know how long it is now. So bear with me, as I'm sure it will all come together in the end. Although I am writing this completely freehand and whilst researching as I go along. So we'll see. So Joanna Yeates was born in England in 1985 and grew up in a lovely place called Hampshire, which is a county in the southeast of England with some stunning places to visit, like Winchester and the Winchester Cathedral. She was really close with her parents, especially her mum, who said they were best friends, just like I am with my mum, so I can imagine how deep their bond was and just how utterly heartbroken both her mum and dad would be to lose her. They did everything they could to support Joanna and her dreams and give her a comfortable upbringing. She actually went to a really prestigious and private school called Embley, a co-educational day and boarding school for people aged from just 2 to 18 years old, located in Embley Park in Wellow. Joanna made the most of having such a privileged upbringing and schooling, excelling in everything she put her mind to, and enjoying it as well. She loved the outdoors, and putting both her love for being outside and all what she had learnt while studying so hard, she managed to gain a degree in landscape architecture and a post-graduation diploma from Gloucestershire University. And by the year 2008, when Joanna was 23, it seemed she had her whole life together and mapping out her future. She had landed a job at a great company that specialised in landscape architecture and urban design, so just what she wanted. She had also met a man too, so everything seemed to be coming together for Joanna. She had a dream job and now a love interest. His name is Greg Reardon, and he was the same age as Joanna, I believe, and also working for the same company, so I imagine they had a lot in common already. He was an architect himself, so surely very interesting and intriguing to Joanna, with all of his wisdom in the field and her attraction and interest to the same things. They just got along so well together. She was incredibly happy at this time, and a big one for her, I'm sure. Her parents also loved Greg. So many boxes ticked here. She in general had a great outlook on life and was a really positive person, making the most of everything, especially now with Greg. Then in 2009, the company they both worked for moved to Bristol, still in England, around a 2-hour drive away, but they loved their jobs and the company itself, so they decided to both follow and settle over in Bristol together. Very exciting time moving in with your partner, but also a big deal to move away at the same time, and that was putting then a distance between Joanna and her parents. But you know, it's only a 2-hour drive, so not another world away. Not long after they moved in, she would be offered another job in the same field, which she accepted. We then get to October of 2010, and Joanna and Greg decide to move into a new place, a flat in an upmarket area called Clifton. So it wasn't just a basic block of flats, or even a proper block, really. They even had their own separate ground floor entry, so didn't have a need to socialise with their neighbours in the block with them. The building is really stunning actually. This area in general just doesn't say murder to me at all. But bad people are unfortunately bloody everywhere, even affluent areas. So we are now in December of 2010. It's the weekend, Friday the 17th, and Greg wanted to go and spend some quality time with his family at Christmas. Gosh, it really can be such a stressful time of year, can't it? Even just trying to fit seeing everyone in and waking right up until Christmas Eve, like me and my partner always used to. And our Christmases just flew by. I was a ball of stress until we just said, you know what guys, it's actually all too much for us. And we started having Christmas Day with just us and the dog. Anyway, back to the story, sorry. Go off on a tangent. So, on the morning of the 17th of December, the Friday, Greg leaves Joanna to go and visit his family in Sheffield, which is in South Yorkshire. A much further drive away from Joanna's parents, around 3.5, maybe even 4 hours depending on traffic, in total, and even passing by where I live to get to it. But at least they had their phones to stay in touch. This night, Joanna decided she didn't want to stay in the flat alone all night. She went to meet some of her friends at a pub called the Bristol Ram, where she would be seen on the pub's CCTV. She specifically said to her friends how she was dreading being alone in the apartment without Greg for the first time. Not because of anything in particular, just that, being alone, and for good reason, as someone with some sick and twisted fantasies was lurking and waiting for a time of opportunity. She did mention, though, just how excited she was for a special Christmas party that her and Greg were set to host the following week. Being at her favourite time of year and in her new home, I can imagine she was full of Christmas spirit. It was also really snowy this year, making it feel all the more magical. Shame a disgusting scumbag felt they had the right to take all of that away from her, forever. Around 8 p.m. that night, Joanna finishes her last drink at the pub and sets off to walk home, which was around half an hour away from the Bristol Ram. On her way back, she made a few stops, caught on various CCTV. Her first stop was at a shop called Waitrose. You only shop here if you have some money. But without Joanna buying anything, she would leave Waitrose. She then called her friend Rebecca Scott and made plans to meet up with her on Christmas Eve. Next, around 8:30, she enters a much more reasonably priced shop, good old Tesco Express, where she did make a purchase for herself, specifically reported a Tesco's finest buffalo mozzarella tomato and pesto pizza. Why was this reported so specifically, you may ask? Well, we will get to that, guys, as it becomes somewhat an important part of the investigation. She leaves Tesco Express around 8:40 p.m. and makes one final stop at a shop over here called Bargain Booze, which I'm sure you can work out what they specialise in. Yep, that's the one, booze. So here she wets a whistle by buying a couple of bottles of cider to wash that buffalo mozzarella pizza down, or so, that was the plan. This was the last time Joanna Yeates was seen alive, caught on the shop's CCTV. But, obviously, someone else would be the last person to see her. But who? Who would want to hurt Joanna? Later that night, Greg was trying to contact his girlfriend. He tried texting but got no responses back. He also called her mobile and the landline, which all went unanswered. He wasn't that worried at first. He knew she was going out with friends. Perhaps she got a bit drunk and fell into a deep sleep. Fair enough. So he didn't immediately stress about not hearing back from her. But the weekend rolls by, and still Greg hears nothing back from her. Yeah, I think it's certainly time to worry and start alerting loved ones. Especially as he's 3.5 hours, maybe 4 away. But her parents were closer. Still 2 hours, but closer. It's now Sunday the 19th, and Greg still has heard nothing from his partner back home. So the last time he heard from her at all was before 9 p.m. on the 17th. It is now the 19th, and he has still not alerted even her mum and dad. I mean, what's that all about then? If I go missing, my fella better be straight onto my mum and dad and the police. I mean, why wouldn't he? I find that pretty suspicious, and just all around strange, really. Anyway, on Sunday the 19th, Greg would return home from Sheffield around 8 p.m. expecting to see Joanna, and I don't know, she would have some completely normal and reasonable excuse or reason to have not answered either any of his text messages or his calls to both her mobile phone and landline all weekend. Why were alarm bells not ringing sooner, you guys? But of course, Joanna was not in the flat, just that poor cat, who clearly looked as if it had been left alone, no food or water, and just looking all over malnourished. Okay, now, that's a huge sign. She would never leave her cat for a period of time. No one to care for it, and no food or water either. Come on, Greg. It's obvious. Something is wrong. Where is Joanna? So besides the cat clearly looking neglected, there were some other warning signs. For example, there was just a random bottle of cider open on the side, and the home's rubbish had not been emptied. Greg was apparently annoyed at first for the state of the flat. Oh, and the cat. Huh? Dude, it's clear something's seriously wrong. Then the biggest major warning signs. He located her bag with her purse and keys both still inside. So clearly, my man, she's not left on her own accord, or she would have most certainly taken her keys. Where is she? Where's your girlfriend at? He's still trying to stay and think optimistic. Did she get locked out? What, and all of this time she couldn't contact you or a locksmith? That's very optimistic, my friend. It's been like 2-3 days now. Something is majorly wrong. So it's around 9 p.m. at this point. Time for Greg and Joanna to tune in to a show they both love to watch together. The Apprentice. Yes, I can't wait for it to come back, so we can watch some more privileged kids make fools of themselves on TV. That's the British one anyway. We always enjoy it. So now Greg is getting pretty worried. His apprentice partner is missing. So I don't know why it took him like an hour to even try this, but he then thinks, ooh, I shall give her mobile a little ringy-ding. So he does. This next part is just like a scary movie, you guys. He dials her number, and what does he hear next? Not just her phone calling through his own, but he then hears Joanna's phone ringing from the very flat he is inside of, and already searched for Joanna. Ooh, that must have given him goosebumps. It gives me goosebumps just thinking about it. He follows the ringing all the way to her coat pocket. Oh my god, that's so freaky to picture. So is she still inside somewhere? Stuffed into her wardrobe maybe? He looks again, but nope. She is nowhere to be found. He then frantically starts to call everyone, asking if they had seen or heard from her, but not a single person had all weekend. Major fucking warning signs, dude. So what did he do next? Well, I'm not sure, but it certainly wasn't calling the police, as for some unknown reason, it took Greg until 12:45 a.m. before he would make a decision he should have made much sooner. Seriously, dude? Why did it take you so long? Anyway, he reports her officially missing, finally, at 12:45 a.m. on the 20th of December. And as soon as her parents hear this, they immediately set off first thing in the morning in the freezing snowy conditions and made the around 2-hour trip to hopefully turn up to find Joanna safe and sound. But as we know, this wouldn't be the case. Otherwise, you guys wouldn't be here right now, and I would have never made this episode. Joanna was not found safe. Police arrived at the flat on Cambridge Road shortly after being contacted, followed by Joanna's terribly worried parents. So the police conduct investigations, starting with questioning Greg, who obviously informed them he had been in Sheffield with family all weekend. They also went around the block of flats and questioned the neighbours too. Then, whilst these investigations were being conducted, Joanna's parents would make a discovery inside of the flat, which I'm unsure why it wasn't instantly cornered off as part of a crime scene, but whatever. This discovery was a receipt for that Tesco's finest buffalo mozzarella pizza, showing a time of 8:40 or 36 on the 17th of December, that date being when Greg last heard from her. This showed that she clearly did make it back home that night. But as police further search, they find absolutely no evidence of the famous pizza, no pizza box, either on the side or in the unemptied bins. It's not in the fridge uneaten. Where is this rogue pizza she purchased? Did Greg eat it? Get peckish in that hour? I'm only joking. So the search for missing 25-year-old Joanna Yeates officially began. Her friends, family and Greg all helped. A website was set up, also using Facebook and YouTube to just get out the word about their missing loved one. This is just days before Christmas. It should be a magical time of year, not a murdery time of year. How horrific for her parents. She was their only daughter as well. How simply awful and heartbreaking. On the 21st of December, Joanna's mum and dad, David and Teresa, made an appeal to the public at a police conference.
If anybody's got her, don't keep her, give her back to us. We miss her so much. I know that's obvious, and nobody can feel the pain that we feel. I just want her back, wherever she is. Joe, my little Joe, come back.
For me, it's not the end. It's what's happened to her in between. I stood outside just having a cigarette. It was cold, and I'll be thinking of my daughter. Maybe she's out there somewhere by herself in the snow, frozen. It breaks me up that I wasn't there to hold her.
Followed the next day by Greg saying, "I desperately want her back. I thought we would be together forever." Her parents made more appeals via Sky News and BBC News on the 23rd of December, where her dad, David, commented that he believed she was abducted after getting home on the 17th, and how she wouldn't have gone out of that flat, leaving all of her things behind. I'm sorry, but I really feel if she lived at home that her parents would have noticed sooner, even if away like Mark, getting no response when calling in to check on the house and her. Parents just know. But they also know when to let you grow up and move out, etc. And then the boyfriend is the one you always stay in contact with. Well, usually the case. Even though they were very close, they may not have spoken each day, her and her mum. I don't mean to judge Greg here, but, well, sorry, yeah, I kind of am. Why the hell didn't he at least alert her mum and dad sooner to get help? Or just at least to check on her. I'm sure they wouldn't have minded. There appeared to be no signs of a struggle or any signs of forced entry into the flat, leading investigators to believe that Joanna knew her abductor in some way, like someone she would open the door to and maybe even welcome inside. As we know from her friends at the pub that night, she was not looking forward to being alone, so I feel she wouldn't have just opened the door to anyone. Greg was ruled out as a suspect, by the way. So Joanna's disappearance just before Christmas of 2010 was extremely publicised, and the murder inquiry would be one of the largest police investigations that had ever been undertaken in the Bristol area. The case would dominate the news coverage in the UK. I'm guessing it being literally days before Christmas had something to do with that. Reward money was offered by Crime Stoppers, £10,000, for any information on who took Joanna, and the Sun newspaper offered a much larger £50,000. And remember the famous pizza, you guys? Even that made its way for an appearance on the news, at least twice, which honestly I just wrongly couldn't help but find the whole thing highly amusing. It was like, have you seen this missing pizza? It's involved in a serious crime and may have some important information to help solve it. So if you see any rogue mozzarella balls around the Bristol area, do not approach, as they could be armed. Contact the police straight away. I have here a photo similar if you do see this pizza or know of its whereabouts.
Okay. I believe Joanna reached her home address on Friday evening, and this would have been at some time shortly after 8:30 p.m. in the evening. This is because we have found within the flat her coat, her mobile phone and keys. I know that from CCTV she went to Tesco's in Clifton Village and she purchased a pizza. I have here a pizza which is similar in all respects to the one we believe she purchased, which is a Tesco's finest tomato, mozzarella and basil pesto pizza. Within the flat we can find no evidence of this pizza or any of the wrappings, and so I would like to make an appeal, firstly for anyone who has any information about where Joanna is now, but I'd also like to make an appeal for anyone who knows where this pizza is, or where any of the wrappings are, or where the box is. And when she was in Tesco's, she bought a pizza similar to this one here. This is a Tesco Finest pizza, tomato, mozzarella and basil pesto. What we have not found is any evidence of this pizza, or the box, or the wrappings. I want to make an appeal, a general appeal to anyone who knows what's happened to Joanna, but in particular I want to appeal to anyone who knows where this pizza is now, or where the box is, or any information at all that might suggest where it is.
Anyway, days and days go by with no sign of Joanna and no leads either, even with a total of £60,000 reward money for any information. 8 days later, on the 25th of December, Christmas Day, a day that should be spent celebrating would turn out to be David, Teresa, her brother and Greg's worst day of their lives. As at around 9 a.m, a couple who were out walking their dog, enjoying their snowy Christmas morning, only 3 miles from the Bristol flat Joanna lived in, made the most horrifying discovery. What looked like a fully clothed female frozen in the snow at the side of Longwood Lane. Just discarded like trash. How tragic and sick. Merry Christmas, hey? And the body was the missing 25-year-old Joanna Yeates. Because it seemed that she had been there for the full 8 days that she had been missing, she was actually completely frozen, like fully rock hard. And not to be too gory here, but in this situation, the person who would perform the post-mortem would actually have to wait for her body to thaw out thoroughly on its own, so as to preserve as much evidence as possible. And guys, this could take days. The post-mortem did begin on the 26th of December, but would obviously take much longer, given the circumstances. How terribly sad that not a single person had passed her body and her sooner on Longwood Lane, just left to freeze into a human block of ice. Terribly sad for her family. More police press conferences would take place where they asked again for any information at all on the disappearance and now suspected murder. On the 28th of December, they did release information that the pathologist managed to find that Joanna was strangled to death. Also found were 43 different injuries on her body, which to me says she absolutely fought for her life and didn't give up easily without a fight. She had cuts and bruises all over her body and head, and had even received a fractured nose in the struggle. Yep, she fought hard alright. Good girl. And if this ever happens to anyone, and you are in the position where you cannot defend yourself really, and you're pretty much almost dying, scratch and scratch that bastard to death and try and leave as much of your DNA on them and get as much of their DNA under your nails. So when she was found, her top was pulled up over her bra and one of her breasts was exposed. Also, she had only on one sock. They actually used this sock on the news to see if anyone had seen it. Which says to me, the sick bastard who did this to her wanted to humiliate, disrespect and degrade her further even after death, knowing she would be found in such a manner. Sick creep. But at first, the police apparently didn't believe it to be a sexually related crime. Sorry, what? You find a woman dead and her body parts showing. It clearly wasn't robbery motivated, as they knew the flat was left untouched, including her money and phone. So why in the hell did they say that? I have no idea. Also, just because someone wasn't penetrated doesn't mean it wasn't sexually related, as many sexual sadists will enjoy and get off on the kill itself, way more than they ever would from having sex with the victim. For some, it's all about the kill itself, especially strangulation, as it's such an up-close, personal and slow way to murder someone. Therefore, the killer gets much enjoyment out of the act itself, and sickeningly, why many decide to have sex with the corpse afterwards instead. It's not always linked to necrophilia, and sometimes the victim may catch them hiding or something, so they have no choice in their mind but to kill them first. But they still want to have sex with them, so they do it after. Ugh. The pathologist also reported that they found no signs in Joanna's stomach of the pizza, the missing famous pizza, even though they theorised she was basically both murdered and dumped at the side of the road pretty much straight after she returned the same night she disappeared, on the 17th. Which, if you think about it, is really quite creepy and incredibly disturbing actually, as we know for a fact she made it home because the receipt and all of her belongings showed that. So does that mean that after this sick fucking freak murdered poor Joanna, he then spotted that cheeky Tesco finest pizza on the side and thought, yeah, you know what, I've worked up quite an appetite, slowly murdering this woman who just wouldn't give up, and for that I'm going to take the food she intended to eat. Wow. That is honestly one sadistic fuck. 80 of the police force, including 30 detectives, came together and opened Operation Braid to hunt down whoever did this. As I said, it was one of the largest police investigations ever in Bristol's history. They searched through over 100 hours of CCTV footage and seized and thoroughly looked through 293 tonnes of rubbish surrounding the flat block, still hoping to find some resonance of this damn pizza box. 5 days after her body was found on the 30th of December, a 65-year-old man named Christopher Jefferies was arrested, who just happened to be Greg and Joanna's landlord. So he would be someone who had access to the building, and also perhaps someone that Joanna would willingly open her door to, maybe even invite inside. Oh yeah, he also lived in the flat above theirs. The police even took his car away. So Chris was a retired school teacher who was also heavily involved in his neighbourhood watch, being described as an eccentric, and I guess, looking at him, people jumped to conclusions, as when the police arrested Chris that day, they did so with literally no evidence at all, purely circumstantial, so I guess they count that. Chris, being the nosy neighbour that he was, had actually mentioned to police himself when previously questioned, as everyone was in the block, that he believed that he saw Joanna on the night of the 17th outside, leaving with 2 other people and speaking in hushed tones, around 9 p.m. This drew police attention, as it would make him the last person to ever see her alive. Well, it wouldn't because she was with those guys, but whatever. But that's the point. If he did it, why would he personally put himself as being the last person to see her? I know some murderers do that, but as a whole, they usually want to stay as far away from the investigation as possible. Certainly not place themselves as being the last one to see the victim alive. Come on, guys. It doesn't make sense, and remember, they have no actual evidence on this man at all. One thing was the fact that he had helped Greg start his car up the morning he left for Sheffield, meaning he most probably knew that Joanna would be alone. Doesn't make him a fucking murderer though, could just make him a really kind man who likes to help people. But this fact, along with him knowing Joanna and, I don't know, looking a bit odd, this seemed to be enough to arrest the dude. Him being arrested was leaked to the media, and he began getting hounded and questioned again about seeing her. To which he unfortunately began to backtrack, saying he was unsure if it was Joanna, but he panicked and perhaps you would say that maybe, just to shut them up. But this did him no favours. Now Chris Jefferies was harassed and berated so much by the British media, it was insane, honestly. He was only taken in for questioning, nothing else. Not charged with anything, yet Britain and all the papers seemed to jump on Chris and fell for the ridiculous headlines, which is really sad, and totally wrong they were allowed to even do this. With no hard evidence he was guilty of any crime. So Chris himself would be the one to contact the police to explain the people he saw that night of the 17th outside of the flat when he returned home. Now, he even said that he felt the police response was, in his words, exaggerated interest, as in not thinking he was being the helpful neighbour in giving these details, but that he himself was guilty. He felt this even over the phone, instantly. Are they just looking to pin the murder on someone because they have no evidence on anyone else? Maybe. Again, I don't see why they would think this straight away. It does happen, yes, but it is uncommon for the guilty subject to then involve themselves so personally to the police when the investigation takes place. The media and press harassment persisted against Mr. Jefferies, who claimed he felt like a prisoner of his own flat, and that it was insensitivity of their presence that bothered him, not caring how it would affect him. They even got a hold of his home phone number, and journalists would call him all times, pestering him non-stop. Poor guy. They would badger him for information that he just did not have. That must have been so awful, you guys. No privacy at all. And this was all before he was arrested on suspicion of Joanna's murder on the 30th of December, of which they did with no actual evidence. Again, just reaching. Then police were seen removing bags and bags of evidence from his flat, like they were just clambering to find something on this guy to pin the murder on him. He was literally persecuted over here. Chris said it felt like an emotional blow punch, leaving him feeling quite numb from it all. And just because he is clearly a very intelligent man and an ex-teacher, deciding not to comment any further to the media on anything, they presumed him guilty, even though he knew whatever he would say, they would only end up misconstruing and twisting it all. So, a detective inspector commented later saying, "We don't just arrest people for the sake of it. We have to have grounds," as in grounds for the arrest, accepted then by the custody sergeant, that the arrest is lawful. So this is what they had on the guy. He had no alibi for what he did when he returned that evening. Okay, so he's single. Not his fault. By his own admission, he'd contacted police saying he believed he saw her. Once again, seems a silly reason, but whatever. And then apparently a car not too dissimilar to Mr. Jefferies' silver car was seen driving over the suspension bridge. Clifton Suspension Bridge, I believe. Oh, and the fact he had the keys to Joanna's flat. But he's the bloody landlord, that's why he had the keys. All very circumstantial, extremely weak at best. But it was obviously enough. The police deeply interrogated Chris for 3 days straight, as they actually managed to get an extension to interrogate him for 96 hours, I believe it was. And after such prolonged, intense questioning, as soon as he was released, the first thing he said to his solicitor was, "Somebody is going to have to be sued for this." Oh, and he meant it. More on that later. Christopher Jefferies was released without charge, yet I saw and heard them on a news clip say he's still a suspect but hasn't been charged. Again, they're basically insinuating it's him alright, they just can't charge him yet. Not correct. I don't know how they're allowed to print this shit. After his release, it was horrific for him. The headlines were really pretty sick. It's mad how they were allowed to say such certain things. They tried to link him to a paedophile and an unsolved murder. What the fuck are they doing? Past pupils from his school labelled him odd. Well, being eccentric still doesn't make you a murderer. In the slightest. Seriously, the drama made of all of this with Mr. Jefferies was so big in the UK, they genuinely made a drama about it, focusing on Chris and what he went through. Now, although it is a BBC drama, I cannot watch it unless I pay $5.99. And I'm sorry, but I'm not doing that. But if you do want to check that out, I do know it's available to purchase in the UK on Amazon Prime for a lovely £5.99. Fucking rip-off. When we already pay for it. It's called The Lost Honour of Christopher Jefferies. I will find a way to watch it. Let me know in the comments if someone knows where I can watch it and if you have watched it yourself and would recommend it. The police could find no evidence at all on both Joanna Yeates' body or in the boot of Chris's car, of which they even brought in specialists to examine thoroughly. So, if Mr. Jefferies, the peculiar landlord with the wacky hair, didn't do it, who did actually murder this innocent woman and leave her sprawled along the side of a lane, just left to freeze? Well, in the upmarket Clifton Flats where Joanna and Greg lived, there was also a basement flat. And here lived another couple, a woman named Tanya Mawson, who was 34, and then her boyfriend, 33-year-old Dutch national Vincent Tabak. And he was an engineer from the Netherlands, and that happened to be exactly where they both were around the 30th of December onwards, and around the time that Christopher Jefferies was released. The police summarised that Vincent saw this on the news, and this pushed him to contact them, trying to point suspicion back onto the only other so-called suspect in the case, Mr. Jefferies. And he claimed that on the 17th, he witnessed Chris's car facing one way in the evening, and yet by morning it had turned and was then facing the opposite way, trying to indicate he had gone back out and taken Joanna's body to Longwood Lane. Now I think, rather than this move being of one of the rare times the suspect enters himself into the investigation like I said earlier, I think he just majorly panicked and thought, what am I going to do? I've got to do something before we get back to the UK and to the flats. So he just made a dumb move. I think he's just not as smart as he thought he was, and instead of pointing suspicions back to Chris, he now just entered himself into the mix. It's got to be different being the suspect to a murder you live nowhere nearby, but he literally lived underneath the dead woman's flat, and the potential quirky suspect landlord. So he knew he would be returning to all of that madness, the press and everything. He probably hoped that his witness account of the car being moved would be enough for investigators, and by the time he was home from the Netherlands it would all be over. Oh, but that wasn't the case at all. Investigators actually then flew out to the Netherlands, to Amsterdam, where Tabak and Tanya were staying with family, to question him further. Man, I wish I could have seen his face when they arrived. I imagine utter shock and horror. When questioning, he also handed over his DNA, and that is where it all went terribly wrong for Vincent. They matched this DNA to a combined sample that was taken from Joanna's body after it had been thawed out. It was a match to where Vincent would have picked her body up with his bare hands and placed it in the lane, where the tips of his fingers would have held her lifeless body from the side. So of course this meant that Vincent Tabak was officially fucked. Oh, his DNA was found on various parts of her body, by the way, not just there. He is now the #1 suspect in Joanna Yeates' murder back in the UK. This was the 2nd of January 2011. So police turned their attention to looking for a car Vincent and his girlfriend shared, a grey Renault Megane. Babe?
Yeah.
How'd you say Renault?
Renault.
Renault. A grey Renault Megane. Which, funnily enough, when the street CCTV was looked into, lo and bloody behold, whose car did they see? Around the time following Joanna's slaying. Yep, Mr. Vincent Tabak's. Along, as police described, at the lower route. Over a river and a gorge, probably hoping to be seen less. But instead, it just made him stick out like a sore thumb. Gotcha. Vincent was subsequently arrested following the CCTV footage, but police wanted to remain mindful of how they handled the last arrest and the media intrusion. Actually, it was quite the opposite. Even going to the extent of putting railings and scaffolding up around the block of flats, closing all nearby streets, and made that part of Clifton a no-fly zone, just so they could privately and extremely privately arrest Vincent and remove his car from the street. Quite the opposite to Mr. Jefferies' arrest. Do you think it's because the police learnt from the first time, or what? What do you think? Let me know in the comments. And if you're enjoying this video so far, please give me a little like, really appreciate it. Chris described Vincent as being well-spoken and polite. He said Vincent had lived in the flat around 18 months, compared to Joanna's 2 months, and he'd recently returned from abroad. He travelled a lot with his job, both nationally and internationally. Chris had only interacted with Vincent the day before, the 16th, when he struggled to get his car up the driveway because of the snow. He knocked onto Vincent's door and asked for help, to which he politely did help, and when Chris thanked him for doing so, he replied, "Of course, what are neighbours for?" Sounds friendly enough, but Chris described this encounter with Mr. Tabak as being icy. Vincent Tabak was born in a place called HOUNDED in Holland. He was the youngest of 5 siblings and described as an introvert and quite shy. He must be fairly smart though, as he managed to get a PhD and move here to the UK. Tanya described as being his first proper girlfriend, so pretty inexperienced in that department, you would think. But he clearly wasn't as intelligent as he believed or perceived, as his own dumbass move to enter himself into the investigation of a murder led to his arrest on January the 20th, 2011. Looking at Vincent as a person, he isn't someone to naturally attract police attention. He is in a fairly long-term relationship, someone who he lives with. These 2 things always make things harder for a murderer. He also has a good job where he was said to be respected, and he had no previous convictions. But as we all know, all of this shit can mean absolutely nothing, as evil can root deep. And some of the sadistic people can somehow hide it so well. Scary. Anyway, Vincent's flat would be searched, where police seized objects like his mobile phone, his laptop, and also his works computer, which for some reason many of these idiots choose to store the nasty stuff on. Perhaps feel the works one is less likely to be seen than a home device, if in a relationship like he was. Through investigations into Vincent's computer, police found that 6 days before Joanna's body is found in Longwood Lane, he would use Street View to zoom right in on the precise area that Joanna's body was dumped. He also searched on the same day forensics, Joe, and Bristol. So that's all very non-circumstantial. That's pure evidence right there. Not looking good for Tabak. He even searched, how long does it take for a body to decompose? The police now believe this murder was for sexual gratification, which I decided right away. But that's only due to further searches and videos and images they would find on his devices, including extreme pornographic images and videos of women being subjected to serious violence, purely for the satisfaction of someone else, and all of the viewers, including Vincent. Also in this evidence, showed women being strangled. So, yeah, he likes the kind of dark webby porn, let's say. Not a good look for Vincent. The Grey Megane Vincent was seen driving that night was seized and forensically examined, further linking both Joanna and Vincent, who he said he'd never even met, by the way, and completely denied her murder, but you can't argue with evidence and DNA. Fibres from Joanna's bed were found in his boot, and as well, fibres from Vincent's own bed were located on Joanna's body. So go on, Mr. Tabak, argue with that. Oh, and her blood was also found in the boot of his car too. He was immediately taken to Bristol prison, then only days after he went into the prison, believing it to be completely confidential with a man of God, he spoke to the chaplain there in the prison, and just came out with, "I'm going to plead guilty." The chaplain replied, "What for?" He said, "It is to do with a crime I committed." The chaplain then asked if it was to do with Miss Yeates' murder. He replied with, "Yes." Well, thankfully, this man of God knew when to talk with police, and so he did. It was later said that a female who was at a Christmas party across the street from the flats was outside and around the time of the murder and heard a scream coming the block of flats opposite, but at the same time didn't think much of it with people cheering and partying all around. Okay, please, I'm sure you can tell the difference between a drunken party scream and the pure scream of terror. Someone being fucking murdered. I don't know. If you ever believe you hear something like this, don't feel silly or laugh/brush it off. Contact the police right away. Don't feel like you could be wasting police time. Think you could possibly save someone's life. Vincent Tabak would be charged with Joanna Yeates' murder on the 22nd of January 2011, where his bail would be denied, by the way. His family back home in the Netherlands actually tried to raise the funds for his release. Ew. He would actually be relocated from Bristol prison, fearing his safety, and was even placed on suicide watch. After saying no comment to nearly all questions asked in his interrogation, except denying he knows Joanna at all, but then all of the evidence against him, plus his confession to the prison chaplain. On the 5th of May 2011, Vincent would choose to plead guilty, but not to murder, instead to manslaughter at the London Old Bailey. Which, after all the denying he'd previously done, this would be a shock to many, but he admitted he'd killed her accidentally, not murdered her. Yeah, right. You don't accidentally strangle to death an innocent woman, you absolute pleb. Who is he trying to fool? I want to see proof of this fool's PhD, I really do. So yeah, it was a complete and utter accident, you guys. The link between the violent porn depicting women being strangled has absolutely fuck all to do with this, right? Oh yeah, listen to this. After searching about Joanna Yeates' murder on the internet that day, he then followed that research with 15 minutes of pure strangulation porn. The sick freak. So after he thought about the woman he'd murdered, he then went and watched that. Oh god. He's reliving it. He's loving it. He has no remorse. But this information was, for some ridiculous reason, was deemed not to be seen or heard by the jury at all. How ridiculous. The jury need to know everything, especially such a link to the case. But apparently it was inadmissible. What a joke. They are determining someone's future and any justice a dead woman's family may receive. Dear God. October the 4th, 2011, and Vincent Tabak stands trial for the murder of Joanna Yeates, which led to a whole lot of press attention and coverage, being such a huge case and investigation in Bristol's history. He claimed she invited him inside of her apartment that night, and he had tried to kiss her, which made her scream in response. He then panicked, and this led to him strangling her, and she died. Right, just that's it, is it? Right, yeah. I'm sure it's that simple. And she never would have invited him inside like that. Mr. Tabak, believing he was a smart man and would get out of all of this somehow, entered the box to face and try and convince 12 jurors of his innocence, portraying to have been the victim himself. What? Apparently it was only 20 seconds of strangling that he did that night. Well, I say that's bullshit for one. Strangulation can take minutes, even up to like 10 or more. Plus it depends if they then make them come back too, only to do it all again, which is common with these sadistic creeps. They can prolong the enjoyment that way, seeing the person be revived and then, do it all over. But remember all of those other injuries she sustained during the attack, most probably, you guys. She fought for her fucking life. 43 or something injuries, including a broken nose. I reckon that was a prolonged strangulation, and Joanna never gave up. She was just sadly overpowered by a man who had one thing in mind: his obsession with strangling women. Then get this. At 21:25 on the 17th, Vincent sent his girlfriend a message saying, "I'm bored." Bored? Bear in mind that this is meant to be in the extremely short period of time after which the police believe he had committed the murder. How sick is that? Maybe it wasn't what he expected. The murder, I mean. The strangulation. They often say that. These sickos, after they murder someone, they often say it just wasn't what they expected. Let down. Bored, apparently. Shortly thereafter, he was caught on CCTV in Asda, which is, by the way, for a multitude of reasons, the absolute worst supermarket in the UK. Don't go there. And police believed at this time, as he was casually prowling the aisles of the worst supermarket ever, that Joanna's body lay lifeless in his boot. They think he was just trying to get some sort of alibi here, but in actual fact, he was just on his way to dump a body on Longwood Lane. But no matter what Vincent tried to do or attempted to say to convince the jury of his innocence, they decided he was guilty of the murder, not just manslaughter, of Joanna Yeates, for his heinous act that night. Now what about Christopher Jefferies and that promise he made before about someone having to be sued for this? The vilification against this man in Britain, portrayed by the newspapers and media, was insane and intense, and really took its strain on Mr. Jefferies, which it would. Being labelled as a complete weirdo who scared kids, and was also perhaps a murderer, it was all a lot to handle. His character was completely assassinated. 8 newspapers would have to publicly apologise, and many made substantial payouts to Chris. Good. So they fucking should. These were The Sun, of course, the Daily Mirror, the Daily Express, the Daily Record, the Daily Mail, the Daily Star, the Sunday Mirror, and the Scotsman, all of which played a part in completely character assassinating this guy, who in the end just turned out to be the friendly, helpful and kind neighbour and landlord, who, yeah, was a bit eccentric, but certainly not a killer. In 2013, he received a full apology from the police, by the way. Good on him for pushing to get justice for himself. Probably helped him being so smart. Now, he's actually an intelligent man. Vincent Tabak, yeah, he was smart in an academic sense, but my god, he's dumb too. Establishing yourself into a murder investigation if you're the actual murderer? Yeah, prob's a bad idea, pal. Oh well, I'm bloody glad you did. Mr. Justice Field labelled him in court as thoroughly deceitful, dishonest and manipulative, committing a dreadful act on a vulnerable woman, believing him to be a very dangerous man. Joanna's parents couldn't face court for the verdict, but Greg did, and shook hands with investigators afterwards. So, life in prison for Vincent Tabak. But, of course, this is the UK, so that also is followed with a minimum of 20 years. So Joe, it should mean life. In 2022, Vincent was moved to a lower risk prison, following him being an exemplary prisoner, meaning he will have a more cushier life than in the high risk prison. But he has been moved to the Winchester's Victorian-era jail, known to have many issues, with unsavoury characters, like double killer Colin Pitchfork. Vincent, even though knowing it would be better than the Yorkshire prison he was in then, he didn't want to move to the HMP Winchester, from maximum security Wakefield. No. He wanted to move back to the Netherlands to serve the rest of his sentence. He attempted, and then failed, in a secret bid to be transferred to Holland. Apparently his life would have been easier there than Winchester's low-risk prison here in the UK. The Dutch-born killer applied to be moved back to the Netherlands under the prisoner transfer scheme, but the UK Prison Service blocked his transfer. Haha. No, pal. You murder one of our own, here in this country, this is where you shall serve your time. And you certainly do not call the shots here, dude. Well, wow. What a wild ride. From missing to murder to the complete defamation of an innocent man and the twist that the killer entered himself into the equation and then got caught. What an idiot. I want to offer my deepest condolences to Joanna's parents and brother, Greg, and all of her loved ones. Just a truly unimaginable horror. And to happen at Christmas, her favourite time of year, and to then be discovered on Christmas Day, just awful and heartbreaking. This story shows how the most sadistic of freaks can lead a normal life, yet also kill, and how just looking eccentric certainly does not make you a murderer. And you should never believe the things you see in the media. Thank you all for joining me for this murder at Christmas. If you made it to the end, you're officially a legend. You can have the legend card from me. Ta-da! Thank you all for watching, subscribing and commenting, and liking my videos. Please drop me a little like on this video. It really means the world to me when I see it. I just think, yes, people are liking my stuff. And then I know what to do more of. So if you did enjoy it, please just give it a second to just like and comment. Thank you ever so much. Take care out there, guys, because evil is everywhere.